Good afternoon, friends. Thank you again for joining us here at Crossnore for the Way Home. We are so excited to have you guys join us each Tuesday, or maybe you're watching kind of after the fact on our Facebook page or even our YouTube channel or listening to our podcast. However you got here today, we're super excited to have you. I'm Holly Kessler. I'm the Senior Director of Community Relations for Crossnore, and I'm your host each week. This week, my guest is Marni Eisner with our Center for Trauma Resilient Communities. And so I'm going to invite Marni to come in and say, hello, how are you today?
I'm good, Holly. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you're here, Marni. Why don't you tell our listeners or our viewers who you are, what you do with the center, how long you've been there, anything you'd like to share about your personal life. We'd love to get to know you.
Sure. So I've been with the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities now for, I think it's 3.5 years. I joined in February of 2019.
Wow.
And a lot of growth has happened since then. So I'm excited to have been part of the center almost from the beginning. We were formed back in 2018, but have come a long way since then. And I actually came to the center and Crossnore because of my relationship with Brett Loftus. And Holly, you and I have that in common because we both
Yes.
moved in Charlotte. I worked for Brett at the Council for Children's Rights. And when my husband's job really relocated us to Winston, I was excited to learn about the merger that was happening. And I reconnected with Brett because I was interested in seeing what they were doing in the community and seeing how I could get more involved. And this position became available. And it's just been an incredible experience. I learn every day because the field of the science of trauma resilience is ever evolving.
Always.
From the original public health study on adverse childhood experiences. So it's just been an incredible opportunity for me to be part of something that's, being created and really making a difference, not just here, but in other communities across the country.
Absolutely. And I am delighted that you joined our staff because even though we both lived in Charlotte for a while, we didn't know each other. So that was terrific. Always glad to make a new friend. So that is great. Well, we have had other guests from the center on, but so if somebody is new, remind us exactly what the Center for Trauma Resilience is and what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. So the Center for Trauma Resilient Communities helps organizations embed and embody the science of trauma and resilience. And I think the easiest way to understand that, and when I talk to people about it, nowadays across the health and human services and education, most people have heard about adverse childhood experiences. So I always ask people, have you heard about the ACEs study? Do you understand ACEs? And most people right now will tell me yes. But when I ask them what have they done to change their behavior now that they have their knowledge, I usually get a blank stare. And that's where I'm able to really explain the work that the center does to help organizations and communities change their culture to have a trauma resilience lens. And it ultimately helps your organization, and it also helps the children and families that you serve.
Yeah, I love that question. It's interesting that you just get a blank stare. So like people have heard about ACEs, but maybe haven't really transitioned that into, oh, I need to do something about it.
Right. What do I do with this knowledge? How do I change my policies, my practices? I think most people, when they hear about ACEs and trauma, specifically think about the individuals they're serving. And although that is important, organizations can suffer from trauma. We've all been in kind of organizations that are dysfunctional and have a lot of toxic stress. So we know that when that happens, they're not operating at their optimum level. And so the center really tries to shift the lens back on the organization and really focus on helping the helpers. So many people who go into health and human services or education or other helping professions are really doing it because they're called to do it, whether it's a spiritual calling, a personal story of resilience. We always joke and say nobody's retiring to the French Riviera doing the work we do. However, it goes to something deeper. But we also know that helpers are terrible at helping themselves. And so, again, another, I think, way that people can really wrap their arms around it and understand what we do is I talk about how we're really here to help the helpers.
Yeah.
because we need the helpers to stay healthy and strong themselves to do the really tough work that they do day in and day out in our communities.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our helpers work like you and I do. We work for a nonprofit, and
Right.
so we have sort of this, I don't know, this history of expecting people, in nonprofits to, kind of work for low wages and work lots of hours and just give them all of themselves to it without
Right.
really taking care of themselves.
Right. Right. And we know when that happens, then you have burnout and
Hmm.
turnover. And, sadly, we like to say when you get really crispy and burnt out, you're not good to your coworkers, you're not good to the people you're trying to help. And I think it's important when so many people, Brett Loftus, who we were talking about, had this quote, and it's just stayed with me ever since I heard him say it. He said, "So many of us are called to do this work, but we're working within systems that don't protect our calling."
Oh yeah.
Right? And so what do we do organizationally? What do we do as a
Hmm.
community to
Hmm.
support the people who are really doing the most important and necessary work that we
Yeah.
have? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I sometimes have people ask me, this is not a question I told you I was going to ask, but it had come to mind. I sometimes have people ask me, is this idea of learning about trauma and building a trauma resilient organization, is that just for people in human services, or is it just for, people that work in nonprofits? And you tell me if I'm wrong, but my response is always no, it's for everybody. It's
Absolutely. It's for
it's for the guy
everybody.
that owns a, fast food chain, or,
Yeah.
the retailer down the street, or the small business owner. It's for everybody.
It's really for everybody because what we know from the research is
Mhm.
trauma and adversity impact everybody,
Mhm.
regardless of race, class, where you're from. Unfortunately, the research shows us that trauma can really impact you regardless of your background.
Right.
And so, whether it's private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector, this information is so valuable. And we
Mhm.
even have projects going on right now in the Winston-Salem community, a partnership with Second Harvest Food Bank and Providence Kitchen and their culinary school and the
Mhm.
restaurants that they work in.
Yeah.
So again, it's knowledge that I think is really impactful for all audiences. I don't remember. I think you were with me. I'm not sure. We made a presentation to Leadership Winston, which
Mhm.
has a very mixed audience of
Yes.
corporate leaders, nonprofit leaders, public sector leaders, and I mean, people came up to us afterwards and just said, "Oh my God, I never had the language for what I was seeing with another colleague at work or what I was even seeing within my own family dynamics." So
Mhm.
I think it resonates because it impacts all of us. Nobody's immune to having adversity in their life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just recently spoke to kind of a smaller gathering of folks from Leadership Winston-Salem, and I didn't even have my PowerPoint. I just sort of talked through the PowerPoint just because of the location that we were at. And I mean,
Yeah.
they were on the edge of their seats, because I think beyond sort of the ACEs study, a lot of this science and a lot of the now what do we do is new to people. And
Yes.
so it's super interesting. And it's of course always great to have an audience on the edge of their chair,
Yeah.
but people get really engaged in kind of the material that you guys present.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, how would you then define a trauma resilient community? That's in the center's name, and we talk a lot about building trauma resilience in our communities. But how would you define that?
So, a trauma resilient community is one that has had a cultural shift and
Hmm.
everybody embraces the knowledge of trauma and resilience. And that's the lens that they're working from. And so they're supporting organizations, but they're also supporting individuals at the grassroots level in our community. And when you see a shift like that happen, you'll start to see improved outcomes across the system. Like, for
Hmm.
instance, we know from the research when a school becomes trauma informed, and a school is like a microcosm of a community within a community, but when a school
Right.
becomes trauma informed, we see better attendance with the children, less disciplinary reports, and improvement in academic performance. So if you extrapolate that to what could happen in a larger community where systems and organizations and those at the grassroots level are all operating with a shared knowledge about trauma and its impact and understanding the science, and they're shifting culture, values, and practices, there can be real benefits.
Yeah, yeah. And my next question, I think you've sort of touched on it, is why is it important for it to be a community-wide effort? I mean, obviously, Crossnore alone in any given community can't make this happen.
Right. Well, and we're really thankful here to have the support of the KP Reynolds Trust to really share that knowledge widely. They've been funding the initial efforts, I would say seeded the initial efforts to really start to those building blocks. And if I could share a quick slide, I think it shows how you build on these pieces. Let me just pull that up here. I'll just wait a sec till you all can see that.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what the slide makes clear and what we see in the work is you have to have congruency and consistency across the community to have the best outcomes. And so we look at these building blocks so that everybody is using the same knowledge, the same understanding, the same language. Those are the three pieces that we've actually been working on here in Winston-Salem for over a year. And for instance, just to give an example, if we all don't have the shared definition about trauma, it makes everything else really difficult if we're not all speaking the same language.
Right.
And so we talk about that trauma is when your internal or external resources are overwhelmed.
Right.
And it's a very individual response. So depending on my individual resiliency or my protective factors, my response to an incident, Holly, might be very different than yours.
Right.
But if we don't all understand that same definition, and you and I know because we're out in the community, if you just ask people what they think trauma means, you literally get a different definition with each person.
Right.
So once we understand that it's really individual to those internal and external resources, it helps build the science on that and build the way we all operate both collectively to work towards solutions and also within our own organizations and systems.
Yeah, I love this visual because what it also looks like to me is that, yes, kind of start with that shared knowledge, shared understanding, then we have shared language. But if there are any pieces missing in there, the whole thing could topple over.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And then just to give you a little more information, let me see if I can get my slides to advance. Nope. Maybe not. I may have to unshare and then advance it myself, but it's not working. But yeah, when you're looking at the important pieces, we have pieces of the shared knowledge that are important for everybody in the community to really have access to. And we look at within the knowledge, like I said, the key foundational piece is a common understanding of what trauma means.
Right.
But then we also work through the trauma science, organizational chronic stress, adverse childhood experiences, which is a foundational public health study that really all of this knowledge has grown from. And again, one thing that I always find really interesting, even people who are familiar with the original public health study are not familiar. And this was myself included. I came into the job going, I know so much because I know about the ACEs study that the CDC did with Kaiser Permanente. It's almost 30 years ago now. But what I didn't realize is that the original study focused on an insured population that was primarily over 50, overwhelmingly white, affluent, and educated. When we look more broadly at our communities, we know that that's not very representative, and we've had to do a lot of additional work to now expand the definition of what adversity and trauma are. So it goes beyond those original 10 questions about what is happening in your home, divorce or death of a parent or alcoholism, mental health, to include, community adversity like racism and poverty and food scarcity and housing instability, to now one thing that I think uniformly people can understand is we've all experienced now environmental trauma with a pandemic or with the hurricane that just came through Florida. So I think the more expansive definition and how our bodies, especially young bodies, can physically react and change from something that's so overwhelming is becoming more understandable.
Yeah, yeah. So you've mentioned Winston-Salem a couple of times. That's where you and I are located.
Yes.
Tell us about the work that is happening right now in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, so again, I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful to our funder, the KP Reynolds Trust, because they were interested very much so in figuring out how do we move our community in such a way that we are going to lessen the trauma and adversity that our youngest members in our community face. And we talked with them pretty extensively about if we shift the culture of the community, we'll be supporting not only the youngest members, which is where their focus was from a funding perspective, but we really be able to support everyone across the continuum. So they funded these initial community trainings that we've done to really focus on those initial 3 building blocks: that shared knowledge, shared language, shared understanding. And we are now in our 2nd year of funding with them. We have trained, or we have had over 130 people go through 3-day training with us. I'm about to have another 3-day training that they funded with another 80 people. We've reached, I think we're up to 20 or 30 organizations have had at least one person go through the training and have then, wanted to seek some additional consultation from us. So we're working slowly. As I like to tell people, it's a journey, not a destination. Culture shift takes time, but we have planted or maybe I like to say we've thrown so many rocks into the lake, and we're starting to see those ripples across the community from KP Reynolds' original seed money to start this work. We've now got a separate partnership with the school system. And the school system is working really hard now to figure out how they become a trauma resilient system. And we've also now have additional projects with Second Harvest Food Bank and the Homeless Coalition. So from one initial boost and really endorsement that this is important and we need to figure this out as a community, these other projects have grown, and we are really starting to reach a tipping point, I think, with a lot of people really talking about this, understanding it, reaching out to us for support. So it's really exciting.
That is super exciting. And I'm assuming too that when you're doing sort of community-wide work like this, that it even includes like law enforcement and first responders and ED personnel and, folks that are really working with people maybe at the moment of crisis for them.
Yeah, so I'm excited because initially those folks were not around the table, but we've aligned ourselves with the School Justice Partnership, which they were a group of law enforcement, funders, school system, Department of Juvenile Justice, the district attorney's office, the judges. There's a whole group of people talking about the code of conduct within the school system. And because their conversation ended up being a lot about trauma, they brought us to the table. And now I'm really excited that several of them will be coming to our training.
That's great.
In the fall. Well, in the fall. It's actually 3 weeks away because we are officially in the fall. I know. I just realized it was October, like today. But those are definitely groups that we want to even engage more because we've been able to have some people, but to actually get to the first responders, it's challenging. Obviously, some people in the positions are in to even give the time for training. And so we're trying to figure out creative ways to deliver the material in bite-sized, 45-minute to an hour pieces. But we're excited to just be connected with these folks and know that it's also on their radar of how important it is.
Yeah, that's terrific. That is terrific. Well, what would be a good way for an organization to start this work themselves?
Yeah, I think we know from the research a few different things. One, if the leadership is not supportive, it's very hard to make that change within an organization. So I would say anybody that's interested in this, it would be a good first step would be, where is the leadership? Are they interested? Are they a transformational leader that can really take us down this path to shift our culture?
Mm-hmm.
I think then you have to see, and Holly, I know you know this from our Crossnore experience, but you really need strong champions who are so committed to this and want to own it and be like the bellwether for keeping an organization focused and on task. Because again, this is something you think about and work at day in and day out. It's not something you cannot check a box and be done. You know, it's evolving, and it's changing the way you think and look at things. And so I think those are really some of the key things from an implementation standpoint, is to just know it will take time, needing transformational leaders, needing strong champions within the organization at all levels to really help an organization embrace that shift.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, where can our viewers or listeners find out more information?
I would say the best place would be to go to the website, although I think the website is under construction, or I know it's open, but I know there will be some changes coming shortly.
Yeah.
And definitely the email, the CTRC email, is a great place to reach out to me directly and ask questions. And I always am open to setting up Zoom meetings or meeting for coffee to get folks locally here more connected to the work, or to support people who are even outside of Winston who are interested in maybe doing this work.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there is good information right now on the Crossnore website under the center's pages. And the center is going to have their own website rolling out over here in the next couple of months, which will have more information on it. But if you are interested, do reach out to Marni. She's a wealth of information, as you've already heard, and we'll be glad to answer your questions. Marni, thank you so much for being here with us today and telling us about the center. I appreciate you being here. And thanks to everybody who is listening. I will remind you that you can watch this anytime on our Facebook page, but you can also check out on our YouTube channel, or also on our blog at crossnore.org for the audio podcast by the end of the week. And again, I'll thank you for being here this week and look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 1 o'clock on the way home.